2nd of January 1967, Phuc Yen's GCI bunker smelled of tea leaves and hot varnish. Cathode tubes ticked, green sweeps washing plexiglass where Senior Lieutenant Tran Quang Min traced thuds with a grease pencil. Outside, winter haze flattened the Red River Valley. Inside, doctrine felt like gravity. Bomb-laden F-105S used the same routes, the same altitudes, the same habits. Far to the southwest, at Ubon, Captain. Jack Talon Reyes of the 8th TFW tugged on his gloves and settled into an F-4C that wore another aircraft's profile like a borrowed uniform. Airspeeds, altitudes, refueling track, radio cadence. The ruse would only work if everything looked ordinary. Min's headset crackled. Scramble, scramble. The 921st Fighter Regiment would have its hunt. He smiled. Clumsy American tech always telegraphed itself. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles of logistics breathed behind Reyes. ALQ pods checked. 4 AIM-7E Sparrows on a cart, 4 AIM-9s on the rails, fuel bladders fat, tankers idling like patient whales. The trap only works if the mimicry is perfect. He rolled, tucked gear, and slid into the published Thunder Chief block, throttle steady, lights as briefed. Over Hanoi, schoolteacher Nguyen Thi Lan lined students beneath loudspeakers promising another day of victory. Offshore, Lieutenant Commander. May Skylark. Bennett paged through rain-smeared radar photos of Haiphong sightings, another kind of arithmetic entirely. The morning felt ordinary, the way ambush mornings do. On Min's scope, the returns looked fat and obliging. He vectored MiG-21s for stern quarter shots and noted winds aloft, a good hunting day. Reyes watched his altimeter settle, every cue shouting, "Slow thud." He thought of the riveter's chalk initials hidden in his intake, of stateside crew chiefs who would never see the Mekong but lived in his checklists. If the MiGs bought the ruse, kills would be won by deception amplified by industry. The first call signs entered the sector. Reyes clicked his radar to standby as briefed. Silence would bait the hook. Min's pencil circled, eager as a noose. The sweep passed, and for a final quiet heartbeat, the war resembled rehearsal. In classrooms, chalk dust hung like fog. On a carrier's catwalk, Bennett tasted kerosene and salt and told herself to trust Diane when the weather went black. "Wolfpack, music is fragged," a voice murmured. ECM alive, chaff ready in other hands, the orchestra tuning. Min's painted river glimmered. The blips slid like fish toward a net he believed he had cast. He permitted a small joke about American waste. Laughter skittered across the bunker. Then the controller gave his final vector and every actor stepped onto marks drawn by another man's expectation. They came up fast, silver needles tipped with K-13s, and ran head-on into an illusion. Reyes felt the tone settle, a thin electrical bee in his headset, and squeezed off an AIM-7E that left the rail like a thrown spear. The Phantom wore a Thunder Chief's habits until the exact second it didn't. Across the river, Min's vector call overlapped a pilot's half-word of surprise. The channel clipped, then returned with someone else breathing too hard. On the ground, Lon heard sirens first, not engines, an omen she would later recognize as physics taking sides. Operation Bolo unspooled like a practiced card trick. Phantoms disguised as thuds turned across the MiG-21's noses, grabbed radar locks, and fired in volleys. Reyes watched a fish bed blur through cloud, rolled level, and rode the Pipper until the second pass. A sparrow found metal, the sky flowered. Wingman called Fox 1, Fox 2, then splash. Professional voices sounded smooth by training. In 12 tight minutes, the ambush did what deception promises. 7 MiG-21s down, no phantoms lost. The VPAF's ready strength chopped like sugarcane. The specifications lived inside the choreography. F-4C, Twin J-79 GE-15S, more than Mach 2 on a clean day, yet today throttled to lumbering. Loadout: 4 AIM-7 E-Sparrows, 4 AIM-9s, no bombs. Radios copied the F-105 cadence. Fuel planning matched the thud track to the minute. Chaff puffs drifted like dandelions. Over Noi Bai and Phuc Yen, the controllers would have seen confidence turn to static. Min stared at the scope as blips he had shepherded winked into noise, his pencil squealing across plexiglass as if sound could pin a vanishing. Lon learned a rule she would teach quietly to her students. Explosions speak first, engines second. Acoustic lag made witnesses historians of echoes. She would later tell a visiting cousin that on days like this the street sounded wrong, that the city heard outcomes before causes. Bennett, far out on steel deck, listened to a petty officer brief weather over Haiphong, ceilings low, rain heavy, and underlined 2 words in her kneeboard: all weather. The night would belong to aircraft that didn't need the sun. Reyes taxied in at Ubon to crew chiefs already rolling fresh sparrows from a cart. Min, under humming lights, erased nothing and added 7 X's. Somewhere between them lay the distance between expectation and ruin. Offshore, Bennett zipped her survival vest and thought about rain that could hide a nation's approach. Afternoon at Ubon tasted of hot JP4 and chalk dust from the mission board. Crew chiefs drew neat red silhouettes beneath canopies while ordnance men pushed racks of clean missiles like grocers rolling produce. Reyes's hands still trembled from the fight. He masked it by checking safety pins twice. In Hanoi, Lon rewrote a lesson plan under loudspeakers that praised heroes by name, and the boys on her block made MiG sounds for one another, high, cheerful, unhurt. Out in the Gulf of Tonkin, Lieutenant, Commander, May Skylark. Bennett walked a catwalk slick with salt and glanced at a kneeboard where Diane waypoints were taped in tidy rows. The war, which had just leaped, resumed its clockwork. Facts hardened while stories softened. The VPAF had lost 7 MiG-21s in minutes, with no American Phantoms downed. The numbers would sting in every ready room from Phuc Yen to Gia-Lam. Reyes told a lieutenant the line he would use for years: if we can make them hear us late, they fight our war. He meant more than sound. He meant checklists, tankers, depots, and rivet lines synchronized across an ocean until deception was not a trick, but a system. Bennett's brief promised a different kind of ambush. The A6A Intruders Diane Suite, AN/APQ, 92 search radar, tracking radar, Doppler, inertial nav, turned monsoon into cover and night into geometry. Typical loads ran to 12 Mach 82s, stepped across rail yards at 420 to 480 knots, altitudes under 500 feet AGL, chaff corridors sown by friends ahead. She would have trusted the scope first, her eyes second, and told herself to believe the stopwatch when rain flattened the world into 2 colors. The scale behind these moments seemed impossible even to those inside it. 5,195 Phantoms had been built by free citizens who left signatures inside panels no one would ever see. 744 B-52s waited on global chessboards. Later in the war, a single three-ship B-52 cell could and did drop over 80 tons in about 12 seconds, almost one-third of the enemy's estimated daily sustainment, proof that American industry could compress a day of war into a breath. Those figures were not boasts. They were logistics translated into physics. Men, reassigned to assist a SAM site near Gia Lam, inventoried missiles by hand, initialed crates, and tried not to think about laughter in the bunker. The pencil left a faint blister on his finger. Wind shifted. Winter haze thickened. Somewhere far away, metal stamped by a night shift he would never meet was already on a ship with his name on it, and the rain was coming in hard. Night over the Gulf drew a curtain so complete the horizon vanished, leaving only instruments to tell the truth. Bennett sat in red light beside her pilot, gloved finger steady on a green cursor as Diane stitched coastline to waypoint to aim point. Rain hammered the canopy like thrown pebbles, and the cockpit smelled of warm electronics and pencil shavings. "Trust the scope," the pilot said, not as comfort, but as doctrine. Ahead, Haiphong sidings hid beneath a lid of cloud that would have grounded lesser crews and emboldened searchlights. The intruders' work began where the human eye ended. They slid down to the briefed block and rode the river mouth inland, altitude hugging terrain the way a whispered secret hugs a lip. Typical loads ran to 12 Mk-82s, the intervalometer set to ladder the yard, fuse nose/tail for mixed cratering and fragmentation. Ground speed held near 450 knots. At this height, the rain turned from weather to camouflage. Jammers upstairs seeded a chaff corridor, a false sky for hostile radars, while wild weasels needled the periphery to keep fan song beams blinking. Bennett called fixes, corrected drift, and let the radar picture become the world. AA woke late and wrong. In the downpour, optical spotters guessed at altitudes. Tracers reached for aircraft already past the target. The first thump was felt more than heard, a fist through air, then a measured cadence as the string walked rails, sheds, and drum farms. On a back street, Land's tea glass rattled 2 breaths before any roar, acoustic lag turning the city into a witness of effects before causes. In the morning, she would sweep brick dust and tell her students that explosions speak first, engines second. Bennett never saw faces. She saw symbology behave, needles stay honest, and the sea's dark mouth swing open for egress at the exact second her stopwatch demanded. If there were casualties, the brief did not count them by name. Accuracy was the promise, not omniscience. The A6's point was precision when weather forbade vision, and the night, properly computed, belonged to those who could afford accuracy at scale. "Off target," she called. The engine's late-arriving growl washed the city just as the last bomb finished falling. It felt indecent, like hearing your own echo after the prayer is over. September 1972, Takli RTFB, floodlights bright as moons. The F-111A line looked like sleeping predators, black radomes slick, ladders tucked. A crew chief palmed a pylon the way a mechanic touches a hood before a race. In the briefing room, a captain traced valleys with a grease pencil. "Hard ride to the ridge, soft ride to the river," he said. Terrain following radar would do the flying that nerves could not. Programmed altitudes 200 to 500 feet AGL, hard or soft ride selected like a pledge. They launched into a sky with no edges. In the cockpit, TF needles twitched like seismographs, and the jet submitted, down a draw, over a saddle, skimming tree black by numbers. Ground speed held near 500 knots because doctrine said that was fast enough to outrun most guesses and slow enough to survive the odd claw of weather. Loads were Mk-82s or Mk-84s set to maul tracks and bridges. The altimeter's low drum beat said this was not a place for sightseeing. The computer watched the ground with an unsleeping stare. Min's fan song scope smeared with rain and land echo. He told his operators to hold for a cleaner return, then to launch anyway. And still the target slid away like a fish under froth. SA-2 missiles loved altitude. At hedge-top height, the engagement window collapsed into anxious seconds. Searchlights, proud weapons of certainty, made white cones that illuminated nothing but weather. AA crews fired where their fathers would have aimed in clear moonlight and watched tracers climb into emptiness. Lon named them ghost drivers for her class. The children repeated the phrase as if naming could own the fear. They knew the household rule now. When the panes chattered, the danger had already passed. The roar belonged to distance. The first news came as dust. Sorties stacked quickly. By the time winter tasted of coal, the 474th TFW had flown on the order of 4,000 night and all-weather attacks, with 6 lost in that phase, a number that sounded unreal until you saw the valleys they chose. The jet did not swagger, it repeated. Every night the needles danced the same small dance until repetition itself became a strategy. They turned outbound toward tankers waiting like patient whales. "Ride's good," the pilot said, almost to himself. The TF light stayed green, the river lay flat as ribbon, and the night, which had been a wall, became a road. Dusk at the SAM site near Guillaume smelled of hot paint, damp canvas, and ammonium. Generators thudded like distant hearts. Min stood on a revetment and watched searchlights comb low cloud, pale swords sketching a story no one could read. Inside the fan song van, scopes hummed and headphones leaked a mosquito buzz that lived in the skull after removal. Doctrine promised geometry could beat wealth. He drew intercept triangles on a chalkboard for conscripts who had never seen an airplane except as a silver idea overhead. Reports from the south arrived folded and tired. Villagers near arc light boxes spoke of glass trembling first, then a high late thunder. At 30 to 40,000 feet, a B-52D rode above hearing. The city experienced the war backward, effect, then cause. Min believed the physics and hated it. He began pushing for mixed tactics. More camouflage, more optical ambushes, reserve missiles held back for second passes that typically never came. The word typically tasted like surrender. May 1972 brought mining at Haiphong and the start of Linebacker 1. The belt tightened. More targets, more nights, more reports that began with dust. Bennett's A6s would have come under weather and over water, trusting Diane to turn blackness into arithmetic. Reyes's escorts, elsewhere, kept corridors clean. Min's sight fired when it could and conserved when it must. He signed for missiles one crate at a time and initialed each form with a pencil worn short. He read an intelligence claim that a B-52 tail gunner had killed a MiG-21 and almost laughed, then didn't. War loved absurdities. He could accept that. He could not accept the math he saw in a captured leaflet. A 3-ship B-52 cell could drop over 80 tons in about 12 seconds. almost 1/3 of the North's estimated daily sustainment falling in a single breath. It sounded impossible until he pictured a rail yard erased between two heartbeats. Lon learned her own rules and taught them quietly. When the teacup slides, go. When the panes chatter, you are already late. Sound belonged to distance now. Behind it, factories he would never see moved like weather. Men drew an ear in chalk, then a bomb, and a long line between them to mark the delay. A gust lifted grit. The night tasted of coal. Somewhere far above, engines he could not yet hear were already on their way. 18 December 1972, Anderson AFB glowed like a factory yard at midnight. B-52Ds squatted in ranks, black-bellied from the Big Belly mod, while ordnance crews fed belts of Mk-82s and Mk-84s into yawning bays. Safety wires snipped, pins rang into coffee cans. A crew bus sighed past with windows fogged by breath. This wasn't glamour, it was throughput. 8 time zones away, Reyes ran a fingertip along his grease pencil corridor at Ubon, his Phantom's escort slot braided to a timetable that had started months earlier in tool rooms and depot lines. He briefed the rule that governed everything: hit time on target or you were noise. KC-135 tankers idled like patient whales. EB-66 jammers rehearsed their staccato. F-105, G Wild Weasels polished the rude knocks they would deliver to Fansong doors. The heavies would come high, 30 to 40,000 feet. 3 ship cells able to throw more than 80 tons in about 12 seconds. At that altitude, the city would feel a pressure change before it heard engines. Physics would turn warning into echo. Min's sector bristled with intent. SA-2 launchers crouched under camouflage. Radar vans were tied to earth with copper braids. Searchlights gleamed like drawn sabers. Controllers rehearsed what they believed were predictable American turns, the checklisted neatness inherited from nuclear doctrine. That neatness helped them on the first night. Volleys went up like iron forests. Over Vietnam and Laos, parachutes bloomed. In a Hanoi stairwell, Lon pressed a teacup to the floor and counted the panes quiver before the long-delayed thunder arrived, learning, without any manual, that explosions speak first, engines second. Even before anyone wrote the totals, numbers threaded the air. The campaign would record 729 B-52 sorties in 11 days, roughly 15,000 tons dropped, and defenders firing on the order of 1,240 SA-2s. You could feel those statistics in the way the bases moved. Forklifts weaving through bomb trucks, yellow shirts dancing marshalling wands, maintenance tents lit like daylight, a choreography as American as a picket line and as brisk as a shift whistle. Reyes strapped in, captive to checklists and trust. Far away, Lon kept her palm on porcelain to catch the invisible tremor. At Gia Lam, Min told his launcher captain to save 2 rounds for a second pass he expected as a matter of doctrine, never suspecting that, from this night forward, second passes would rarely come at all. By dawn, chalk dust ringed the briefing boards, and the tone had shifted from inheritance to invention. Theater hands took the stick. Vary altitudes, dogleg the turns. Stagger the gates by seconds, not minutes. Rotate jamming plans alphabetically, then backwards. The line that mattered came last. We write our own surprise. On paper, it looked like scribble. In the air, it became a melody nobody had practiced, yet everyone knew how to hum. Routes bent where checklists preferred straight lines. Cells stepped higher or lower by mere hundreds of feet, so proximity fuses misjudged. Chaff corridors widened into glittering false rivers. Weasel timing tightened until fan songs flinched on command. Reyes split his escort stack high-low, a hand over a hand, guarding against MiG probers and watching for the comb of searchlights that meant the belt was awake. EB-66 crews called cadence on the ether. Tankers drifted patient in their racetracks, the quiet giants that made bold notes possible. Min's operators fired, waited, reloaded, and fired again. He had argued to hold a reserve pair for second passes. The passes rarely came. The scope no longer matched the manual. Altitudes wobbled off predicted blocks. Turns arrived early or late by heartbeats that mattered more than pages. On a bitter wind night, someone muttered that a B-52 tail gunner had downed a MiG-21. Min did not argue. Absurdities had become part of the weather. Land Street suffered on the 26th. A box walked a transformer yard and a seam of houses as if the map had been folded wrong. She felt the pressure first, like a hand pressed into air, and only then the belated roar. In rescue orbits far away, crews counted fuel and options, proof that the system planned for failure and launched anyway. Losses fell as the playbook rewrote itself. The tallies would be posted later: 729 sorties, 15,000 tons, 15 B-52s lost by official count. But improvement was visible in the emptier sky along ingress and egress. Surprise had been reclaimed not by luck, but by rearranging familiar notes into a harsher, safer song. Reyes watched the second hand creep through his debrief. Min stared at a blank scope and listened to his own breath. Lon brushed brick dust from a child's hair and kept the minute hand in her pocket where she could feel it move. Reyes turned a plywood wall into a chalkboard and translated terror into math. 3-ship cell, over 80 tons in roughly 12 seconds. 10 such cells across a night. A convoy's month reduced to half a minute of falling steel. Across 11 days, 729 B-52 sorties and about 15,000 tons. He circled the number that felt cruelest and simplest. One cell's drop approximated nearly a third of the North's estimated 278 tons per day needed to sustain operations. In a single breath of flight time, the war's logistics tilted. He walked it backward for a lieutenant with shaking hands. Altitudes around 30 to 40,000 feet meant the city heard the war in reverse. Impact, then engines, because sound was late and gravity was not. EB-66 jammers braided with ALQ pods to unhook range gates. Chaff made false rivers. Doglegs moved cells off, predicted turn points by seconds. Weasels suppressed long enough for the beat to land. What looked like chaos was rehearsal. Industrial democracy arranged as choreography. Lon learned time as a kind of shelter. She clicked a salvaged stopwatch and let window glass tell truth before her ears did. On a good night, the teacup only shivered. She taught children to move on the tremor, not the siren. In her ledger, she wrote dates, then a single noun, dust, because that was the weather now. Min counted by subtractions. Missile crates left the revetment. Searchlight bulbs burned out. AAA, crews stripped spares from one gun to feed another. He read defeat in procurement forms, signatures becoming strategy. A captured handout listed American production totals: 5,195 Phantoms, 744 B-52s, and the numbers felt like a language designed to outlast breath. At the bottom of the board, Reyes wrote the only sentence that mattered: speed of change. Factories, carriers, Tank farms and tool rooms had moved faster than an enemy could learn. He set down the chalk and listened to the silence where engines used to be, a silence that carried its own thunder, the knowledge that a free people, organized and relentless, could compress a day of war into seconds and make the ear, like doctrine, arrive too late to help. 29th of December 1972 came in gray and silent, as if the city itself were taking inventory. Lon stepped into a courtyard dusted with brick powder that squeaked under her sandals. A bicycle bell rang because car horns were gone. She swept, paused, and pressed her palm to a window frame to feel for tremor that did not come. Across the world, Reyes closed a logbook streaked with grease pencil math, and Bennett, hair still smelling faintly of JP4, signed one last gripe for a bulky radar. War, like bookkeeping, ended in columns. The numbers were not rumor anymore. Across 11 days, B-52s flew approximately 729 sorties and dropped approximately 15,000 tons. Defenders fired approximately 1,240 SA-2s. Official losses stood at 15 B-52s. Early nights had hurt, predictable turns, altitudes, and timing gates written for another era. Then the theater rewired the score, varied altitudes by hundreds of feet, doglegs in place of straight lines, jamming plans rotated like ciphers, wild weasel suppression stitched tighter. Losses fell as complexity rose. That was the lesson etched in carbon dust. Not just mass, but adaptation at mass. Min wrote his final site report with careful neatness. He recorded salvo counts, reload times, radar downtimes, and the failure of optical ambushes when second passes never came. He did not write the sentence that lived in his throat. We spent courage as if it were ammunition and met a machine that refilled itself. Lon chalked a roll call. 2 names did not answer. She drew small circles beside them the way teachers do when waiting for a late arrival, then erased them with the edge of her sleeve. Stateside, debrief rooms turned to classrooms. Deception is not garnish, Reyes told a room of captains. It's the meat. Bennett's notes translated theory to deck cycles. Chaff before ingress, weasel timing in minutes, tanker brackets checked until the numbers sang. Doctrine shifted on paper, theater judgment overwrote checklists, EW/CD as first brick, root libraries designed to shuffle. But in memory, it shifted because faces had paid for each bullet point. A maintenance crew draped canvas over a holed bomber and rolled it to salvage, where it would donate organs to a fleet still flying. Land tied a split banner with string and thought of seams. Min locked a steel cabinet and counted the clicks. Across 3 rooms and 2 continents, pens lifted at once. The ledger closed not with triumph, but with a math problem solved in a language only factories and flyers could speak. The lecture hall smelled of old varnish and coffee. Reyes stood before a wall map pin-pricked with roots that had once been secrets. Bennett sat in back, pencil ready. On the lectern lay a translated report from an anonymous enemy controller, Min's voice without a name, its margins full of patient arithmetic. He began not with a hero's anecdote, but with physics. At 30 to 40,000 feet, sound arrives late. Human ears are historians, not sentries. If your plan assumes people will hear you coming, you have already lost the vote. He sketched the operating system that replaced habit. Chaff corridors first, so radars chased rivers of false return. ALQ pods mixed by sector. Jamming plans A through D rotated and reversed like code books. Doglegs and altitude staggers moved cells hundreds of feet off prediction, enough to spoil fuses, not enough to spoil timing. Wild weasel suppression windows were written in minutes and honored like sacraments. He drew a tiny triangle for a 3-ship B-52 cell and wrote, approximately greater than 80 tons / approximately 12 seconds beside it, then arrowed to the note, approximately 1/3 daily sustainment, the sentence that had hollowed a city while leaving its math intact. Bennett raised a hand to translate theory to work. Deck cycles meant every clever route needed fuel math that fit tanker racetracks. Jammers needed launch times that survived a bulky starter. Diane would have its drift checked against coastline beacons because even poetry must be proofed. She wrote, "Trust the scope" on the board and added, only because the scope was built on time, paid for on time, and replaced on time. Industrial democracy, in her telling, sounded like choreography. Unions, riveters, machinists, pilots, and kids with wands on dark decks, free citizens consented to be coordinated. For scale, he let the numbers stand alone. 5,195 F-4s, 744 B-52s, 833 F-105s, 693 A-6s. One fighter model built in quantities that exceeded the enemy's entire fighter inventory, not by boast, but by ledger. He ended with the picture he always drew, an ear, a falling bomb, and a long line between them. "Make that line longer for them," he said, tapping the space, "and shorter for us." In the quiet that followed, the door hinges clicked like distant turbines spooling up to a familiar, decisive hum. The museum hangar held its breath. A B-52D tail blister sat on pylons, plexiglass clouded by fingerprints. A battered A6 nose cone showed chipped paint where salt had chewed it. A phantom intake gleamed, and if you leaned close, you could still see chalk signatures inside. A riveter's joke preserved under lacquer. Children shuffled past with audio wands. Lon paused at a display labeled Com Thien, fingers resting on a cracked lintel shipped from her street. Like Braille, the ridges spelled a language of steel and dust. Reyes traced a chaff corridor on a map that now lay behind glass. Bennett, a step away, pointed to a waypoint where Diane had always behaved. A placard offered the ledger in neat font, approximately 729 sorties, approximately 15,000 tons, approximately 1,240 SA-2s launched, 15 B-52s lost officially. Another card gave the production chorus: 5,195 F-4s, 744 B-52s, 833 F-105s, 693 A-6s, and a line that still felt impossible. One American fighter type built in numbers that dwarfed every fighter the enemy ever fielded combined. The scale sat quietly, needing no drum roll. Min's words, anonymized and translated, lived on a small plaque. "We fired with courage." They answered with change. He would have disliked the poetry. He would have admitted the truth. The exhibit did not gloat. It explained. C-AID and EW as first bricks, route variation as policy, terrain following turning valleys into roads, acoustic lag weaponized by altitude and speed. It honored names in bronze and left space for the unrecorded, civilians who learned that sirens are slower than gravity. A guide asked for silence and pressed a button. Turbines rose in the speakers, a long, patient roar. The slideshow showed bombs walking a rail yard. The sound reached the room after the images finished falling. Some visitors smiled at the timing without knowing why. Lon did. She closed her eyes and felt the delay like the echo of a prayer. Reyes glanced at his watch, though it was not running. Bennett touched the A6's skin and felt, faintly, the grit of old salt. Outside, sunlight glanced off a parking lot full of ordinary cars, citizens' machines, not wars. That was the point, she thought. A free country had once synchronized factories, carriers, and airfields until night became a road, then put the tools away without forgetting how to use them. The hangar door hummed shut like a promise kept.